and hit it. Got it. All right, all right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's book club. And today we're on book number 3, which is The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy. This is probably one of my favorite books. I think of all the books I've read in terms of self-development, this has probably been the most fundamental, most important to me. I'm not sure if you'll have a chance to read it. If not, you're in the right place. You're gonna get a quick little recap. But if you haven't, it's a pretty quick read. It's about 160 pages. Or if you want to get the audiobook, it's about 4.5 hours. So it's not that long, but I highly recommend you at least get exposure to it in some way, shape, or form aside from this. So again, this is going to be more of a summary. The goal is not to sound about an hour. So we will be touching more or less high points per chapter and what means the most to us. When I say us, I'm talking about myself, Serge, Bison, us who are here facilitating it to you. And with that said too, there are many subpoints per chapter, so we'll focus on the main ones. But if you see a subpoint that interests you or that intrigues you, feel free to just hop off mute, say something about it, and then we can address it as necessary. And in worst case too, I also have a copy of the book right here, so I can go to that particular point and speak on what the author has said. So with that said, let's go ahead and keep this pushing here. Let me minimize this. I always not take up too much screen real estate because while it's recording. Yeah, so let's hop right into it. Here's the meeting outline. We're going to start off quickly with a book introduction and overview. Then we'll go through the chapter summaries. There's 6 main chapters. However, there's also an intro and a conclusion. So we'll kind of go through that pretty quickly because those items help to really frame the book. And then we'll talk about the key takeaways from our perspective in terms of what probably will give most value to the most people, like from an aggregate point of view. However, feel free to insert your own. We're only going to focus on 5. And then lastly, we'll open the floor to some Q&A and or even just comments before we hop out of here. And then lastly, we have reminders and closing remarks. Closing remarks will come from us. There were no reminders from any of the admins. So I just leave that particular slide. And yeah, just go ahead and take it from there. All right. So the compound effect, intro and overview. All right, so here are the book contents and outline. As I said earlier, we start with the introduction. Then we talk about the compound effect in action. We speak a little bit more about what it is and why it's important. Then we focus in on choices, habits, momentum, influences, and acceleration. And these are all core parts of the compound effect as the author describes it. And it'll make more sense as we go on. So starting off here with the introduction. So the book basically is about success and what it really takes to earn it. And specifically, it focuses on like the small actions day in and day out that are easy to do, but sometimes overlooked. And that's actually a quote by Jim Rohn, who's also one of the author's mentors. But the important part here is it talks about like more or less not looking for instant gratification, but doing the work day in, day out. Alex Hormozi, some of y'all aware of him, he talks about 100 primary actions for 100 days to see results because the goal is to really get the momentum going. And then from there, you'll start to slowly gain traction. And that's when the rubber meets the road. Second point here, he aimed to teach us how to harness the power of the compound effect. And the compound effect is basically the operating system that has always been running our lives, either for the better or for the worse, because basically everything you do, whether you have habit, the actions you take, the habits you have, it's compounding and bringing you in a particular direction, whether good or bad. And you'll see like what that looks like, especially as you start going through the first couple of chapters. But it's key to remember that the compound effect is always in motion. So this is why, I mean, not to get like a little bit corny here, but I'm sure you guys have seen little cartoons of you have like your conscious, you have a devil on one shoulder and an angel on the other shoulder. And that's basically good decisions or bad decisions. And every time you choose a good decision, it compounds you and moves in a particular direction. The same thing with bad decisions. And every single decision counts, which is part of the kind of like the emphasis on your back here. Every decision counts, but the question is going to be which way you want to move. And you don't need to be perfect, but you need to be conscious about what you're doing. And then moving on here to the next point, he talks about his professional background, to kind of give us an understanding of who he is, where he comes from, and why you should listen to him. Long and short of it, not to touch too long on this, but He is, or I should say, was the co-host of Success Magazine, where he did a lot of interviews with many different entrepreneurs over many different walks of life and many different industries. And through that exposure and that one-on-one FaceTime, he was able to distill down what actually makes people successful. And no matter who or what industry, it always boils down to the same fundamental things and more or less how those things compounded over time. And he also talks to about his own personal success being in real estate, having basically I think he had his first house in the affluent area at like age 18. He was a multi-millionaire, aka making more than $1 million a year by age 24. And this is back about at least 10 years ago, probably closer to 12 or 15. So he's a mover and a shaker. And then lastly, he gives a fair warning to the reader that hard work is going to be the minimum to even get started. And it's not necessarily going to be super duper difficult, but it's more about being consistent over time, which is the whole point of the compounding effect. All right, so with that said, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next slide. Actually, no, let me go ahead and say this last little piece here, because I think this is more important, needs to be echoed over and over again. We typically don't need new information. We need a new plan of action, because almost always we know what to do, or at least have heard or been exposed to what to do relative to our goals. The hard part of doing the small things day in, day out to make sure that you achieve those small tasks and milestones day in and day out that moves you towards that goal. And that's going to be echoed throughout the book. All right, so chapter 1, the compound effect in action. So here he starts off by talking about slow and steady wins a race. And basically he talks a little bit more about his personal background, how it shaped him and his understanding in terms of the compound effect. So slow and steady wins a race, he says, and he truly believes in his heart of hearts that if you give him enough time, he will outwin and outcompete everybody else, not because he's smarter, not because he's better, but because he will be more consistent over time and leverage the compound effect. And when he talks about his own personal background, basically his parents divorced when he was about 18 months old, and then he was raised by a single father. And basically since early middle school, like what he could remember, he would always be woken up at 6 a.m. by the sounds of his father deadlifting in the garage, which was right next to his bedroom. And he's like, you can set your clock by the time by his father's workouts regimen, because he was always so exacting. And his father was leveraging the compound effect, whether you knew it or not. And that really started to instill in him what it meant and what it took to be successful. And then also different things too, from the different chores that his father made sure that he was doing. His father was a football coach, and he was really hard on his students, and I should say student athletes. And with that said too, it rubbed off on Darren in a particular way. And he just started literally and figuratively scheduling and changing his life to make sure that he was getting shit done, like almost like an obsessive goal achiever. So anyway, that's his background. And he was able to see how that over time, and also with the interviews, how it kind of coalesce into the compound effect and how it actually makes people better over time. And it's something anybody could do. Moving on here to these next couple of points. So you haven't experienced the payoff of the compound effect. And typically what he means by that is most people, they may take 1 or 2 steps forward and then they take 1 step back, so on and so forth. And basically it's about consistency over time here. And when we start talking about like what those steps look like, there are small, smart choices plus consistency plus time, and that equals a radical difference. And that could be illustrated in like his example of the magic penny. The long and short of it in the book, he goes on to give an example. What would you rather have? Would you, and this is a question that those of us here on the call, would you rather have $3 million up front or a penny that doubles for 31 days? And for those of you who read the book or aware of this, let's just say proposition, you know the answer is the penny that doubles for 31 days. But the reason is why? And let's go ahead to the next slide and just kind of show what that looks like. So essentially, day 1, you have a penny, day 2, you have 2 penny, day 3, 4, and it's literally growing at a snail's pace. What you notice here, even by day, the first week, you only have 64 cents. The second week, you only have $81.92. But the important part is the fact that it's compounding. The penny is doubling every time and it compounds on itself. So by week 3, we'll just go straight for day 21. You're at the person now at $10,000 and change. Week 4, day 28, they're actually at 1.3. And you can kind of just see how it happens, because 10,000 turns to 20, 20 to 41, because I'm not counting the change here, 41 to 83, 83,000 to 167, 167 to 335, and so on and so forth. And you see as a penny doubles each day, day 28, you're actually at 1.3 billion just from a penny doubling each time. And the only reason why this works is because it's consistently doing the work over time. Yes, it's doubling. Yes, that's a little bit of an exaggeration. However, this is just to illustrate the point of the compound effect. By day 29, it's at 2.7 million. By day 30, it's 5.4 million. And by day 31, it would be 10 million and change. And that's the power of the compounding effect illustrated in a particular way. Actually, there's a pretty cool hustle that you could do with this, literally and figuratively. You could just do something like this with friends at a golf course if you play golf, because it's 18 holes in golf. If you're good at golf, you want to hustle your friends, you'd be like, hey, you know what? I just want to play for fun, nothing too crazy. Just, you know what I'm saying? We'll just bet $1 and we'll double every hole. Or you bet $10 and double every hole. And you can literally use the same kind of compounding effect. So by the end of the game, the holes will be worth like 10, 20 grand, depending on what you start off with. But anyway, that's the magic penny, and that's the example here. I'm gonna go on, because of limited time, I'm just gonna focus on maybe one or two more things here and then move on to the next chapter. A very important part of this chapter are the three friends. Basically, take three friends. I forget their names, so you probably not gonna remember them anyway. But basically, there's three friends, all married, and they all are actually plotting down the same life path. So they're all, let's just say they're all married, they all work the same kind of job. And here's the thing, to illustrate what compounding looks like, one of them says, I'm just gonna stay the same, do the same thing I've always been doing. One of them says, you know what, I'm just gonna do a little bit better. So I'm just gonna remove 125 calories from my diet each week. And then the person number three is like, you know what? I want to live and enjoy life a little bit more. I'm just going to add 125 calories per day. 125 calories is very small. It's like literally let's just say 1 cup of cereal, or maybe one mixed drink each night, because you decide, you know, I'm just going to live a little bit more, maybe have or a couple glasses of wine, depending on how big a glass of wine you pour. So basically, they plot what this looks like and what the changes, and they do it both in terms of, let's just say, consuming that extra 125 calories, but also doing other things too that are positive. Reading 10 pages of a book each night, or listening to your favorite audio CD or audio podcast in terms of getting better. We're just gonna focus on the calorie aspect. So you take these three people, one person doing everything the same, one person who's adding 125 calories per day to like the typical lifestyle, not that much, and one person who's trying to be a little bit better and removing 125 calories. Basically, over time, because compounding, especially in the beginning, it's very, very small. So in the first 5 months, there's literally no difference. The difference would be a rounding error of 0. However, after 12 months, still really nothing. 24 months, you start to see changes, but nothing too crazy. Measurable, but nothing too crazy. But here's the thing, by month 31, all of a sudden, the person who added 125 calories per day to their diet is now 30 pounds, a little bit more than 30 pounds overweight. The person who removed it from only 125 calories per day from their diet, is now 30 pounds less. And then the book kind of goes through the math, because it's 3,500 calories in a pound. And basically, if you do the 125 per day, and then you do it, and you just kind of do the math out, the math checks out. So literally and figuratively, what happens is a person just did a little bit better, ends up being 60 pounds lighter than the person who just added a little bit more in terms of not necessarily being bad, but being a little bit worse than they could have been. Whereas the person in the middle, nothing happens to them, or but they're still a little bit bitter, because they just realize, oh wow, if I would have just started at the same time this other person who was doing a little bit better I would have lost 30 pounds as well. And then if I would have done some of the other things too, I probably would have been thinking differently, and then therefore acting differently, similar to what we spoke about in our book, reading number 2, Secrets of the Millionaire Mind, in terms of like, it's your thoughts and your feelings that create your actions, and that determines the results. But going full circle, that's basically the key theme of the three friends. Hopefully I did a good job of explaining it. I probably should have maybe added a couple more illustration slides, but simply put, that's the power of compounding. And one note to add about the three friends is, most people are actually the guy in the middle who doesn't do shit, if that makes sense. And that's important to realize, because the book, they talk about it, Tony Robbins, another, let's just say, personal development guru, he talked about it and he said, this is where a lot of people are. They're comfortably numb. They want to do better. They know they could be doing better. However, because they're not in pain or not enough pain to change, they don't change and just kind of deal with it. And that's where we don't want to be. That's probably the reason why we joined the network, like a network, like the kind of network that we're in right now. So that's that. The only other thing I talk about here, I mean, there's quite a few things. Simply put, ripple effect. Everything does affect everything, and it ripples through your life. We can dive into this if y'all want later on. Success, old school, basically talks about how our parents, actually really our grandparents and those before us, they understood the importance of compounding actions over time, using and leveraging the skills they learned as kids, but more importantly, doing it for their whole life to go ahead and build towards something. And how that's kind of a notion that's no longer appreciated as much in today's day and age. And then lastly, the microwave mentality. And microwave, aka you throw it in there, it's instantly done. That's just not how the real world works. For items that have to do with the natural order of things in nature, you have to grow and change over time. All right, so let's go ahead and move on here. And I'll go ahead and I'll keep it simple, probably focus on 3 points per chapter. And if there's anything that you see that pops out, feel free to come off mute and chime in here. All right, so chapter 2, he focuses on choices. And he starts off the chapter by saying, we all come into the world the same way. You know what I'm saying? Naked, ignorant, not knowing what's going on. And then after that grand entrance, we all start from the same place, more or less. And then everything else in our life will exist because we first made a choice about something. And that's part of what put us in decisions. And those decisions put us where we are today. And it's tough too, because some of us grew up in different circumstances where we don't have great information to make better decisions. And it's tough because we still make those decisions to put ourselves in those places. And it's not necessarily about where you start, but it's about where you end and what you do in between those dashes between your birthday and your death date. But that's more or less what we talk about here. The next point, elephants don't bite, right? And he's like, hey, have you ever heard of an elephant biting somebody? And the answer is no, you haven't. But you have heard of mosquitoes biting. And it's very similar to like that one quote, death by 1,000 cuts or little slits, whatever the case may be. That's what kills us. It's those bad habits over that, because again, we're compounding positively or negatively based on our decisions. So it's those decisions where we know we could be doing something better, or we know we should be doing what we're doing, or we know we should be doing something, or we stay on the couch. It's those over time, those are that accumulate into the big killers. It's not necessarily like that one big incident. And that's what's meant here by elephants don't bite. Thanksgiving year round, he goes ahead and talks about this a little bit more in terms of like just the small things of what some people, specifically some of the men that he talks about, were doing relative to their marriage, and how basically it's easy to blame your partner or spouse in your marriage. However, not many people look inside, and these small things they were doing to neglect here and there put their marriages on the rocks. And simply put, actually, well, you know what? That is part of this particular one. Well, for Thanksgiving year round, there's 2 things. The first one that's more specific to this particular item is he just started doing something where he compounded and focused on his particular life. Specifically, he wrote down and kept a Thanksgiving journal where every day he'd write down what he admired about his wife and really look for the positive things he could just put down in the journal. And he did that for 365 days, and then gave it to her on Thanksgiving. And she said, or maybe he gave it to her on her birthday, I forget exactly, but the important part is his wife thought it was the best gift that she'd ever received. And that was the same year he had bought her a BMW. And by him being focused each day on seeing the different things that he could write down in this book that taught her positively and focus on the positive, he compounded that affectionate, building that affection and passion for his wife, and he fell in love with her all over again because he was able to see the nuances in her nature. And this is just something that he would have just like, it just would have been easy to sweep under the rug. But that compounded and changed their marriage.
Yo, I want to chime in a little bit on this before we go too far. Just yesterday I was watching a video, and one of the guys came in and he was talking about a lesson he learned from Andrew Tate and Justin Waller. All right. And I'm going to actually post it on the chat later on, but you know, he said he has a goal board in front of him. But one of the things that he started doing after listening to Jay Waller was he moved all of his goals to the left and side of the panel, and he started writing what he's grateful for, right? Because he had a major success. He made about 21K in a transaction, but for some reason, his mind was automatically gravitating to all the negatives. It was automatically saying, you know, I'm not worthy, I'm not doing enough, XYZ. So by him moving his goals to the side and constantly being focused on what's next and what's tomorrow, he actually started to hone in on the things that he has accomplished, right? So that's kind of what came to mind as you were saying that. I think it's just as equally important for us to keep top of mind the things that we've already accomplished.
Well said. And it's funny too, because like while I was on break over this last week, reading, like I probably read this book like maybe 7 or 8 times. Well, one time a physical book, but maybe 6 times just listening to it over again, because it's probably one of my favorite books. But I still have to say this. He talked about when gratitude journaling. That's what I'm saying to you. That's what I'm saying to you. But here's why I bring that up though. It's something that very similar to what you just said, Bison. I was going through the same thing. So I was like, yo, you know what? My 9 to 5, it's good. My teammates want me there, so on and so forth. But I'm looking at Fresh. I'm looking at Andrew. I'm looking at Jawad. I'm just like, yo, I need to be out there doing this and the third. And sometimes it makes you less grateful for what you have right in front of you. So I've been literally focused on just that. So instead of applying to my spouse like he was, I've been applying it every day to my 9 to 5. So now it's even changing how I interact and look at my work. And this book is legitimately for 150 pages. I think with all the interviews he did, there's so much gold in here that it's actually, even like these first 3 books, I would rather just study like a handful of books than like read a shit ton of books. But these books are gold. Anyway, let me go ahead and get through these here because I know we only have about half an hour left. But thanks for chiming in, Bison. I appreciate you. All right, so let's see here. What I let me see what is actually worth here. I think the most important part of this particular chapter 2 is the scoreboard. And he talks about whatever it is you want to get good at, you have to track. And not necessarily get good at, but whatever you want to improve. Because if you want to improve it and you haven't made progress, it's because you're not tracking it. And if you're not tracking it, you can't monitor it. If you can't monitor it, you can't manage it. So you have to track. And basically he spends like this, half this chapter is about tracking. I think it's it's probably the most important thing. Me personally, again, after restarting reading this book again, start tracking my sleep time, my wake up time, and we'll talk more about book ending days later on as well. But I just started tracking those 2 items: sleep, wake, morning exercises, because sometimes I let that slip a little bit. And then also getting in front of my money, both in the morning and the evening, just to see like what's going on, my transactions, because like that's really what's most important to me as I move forward in the game of life. So tracking and specifically making sure it's consistent and also very, very, I don't want to say, what's the best word? Diligent. Let's see here. And as you can see here, money trap, it's just like, he talks about like money escaping your pocket. Now people don't realize that a $5 coffee each day, especially if you do it over years, is like literally and figuratively. Because when you consider the fact that $5 being spent, if you invest it and you get 8% interest over the course of, let's just say 20 years, it's the equivalent of 50 grand or a Mercedes Benz. And how you're robbing yourself instead of just buying coffee, baking it at home, so on and so forth. And then keep it slow and easy. And then when it comes to tracking, because this is something that you want to do, well, anything you want to do from a compounding perspective, you want to do it for the rest of your life. When it comes to tracking, the whole point of tracking is to make you consciously aware of those unconscious decisions that we make and we do without realizing. And then lastly, the unsung hero, which again is a form of tracking, but I'm not going to go ahead and just dive too deep into that. And lastly, and probably most important, is time is of the essence. And to illustrate this, he kind of gives an example of compounding in terms of putting money away into the stock market. You have a friend, they're 25, she starts putting away money, $100 a month, and she only does it for 10 years. And then you decide to wait, like, let's just say 10 years, 15 years, you start when you're 35 or 40. She could put it in for 10 years, and because of compounding, her basically whatever she end up with is still going to be X amount more than the person who puts it in for maybe twice as long, who starts later, because the money had more time to compound. Again, the details are in the book. I'm not going to get too crazy or too deep into it. But as far as, I think, well, let's go to the next slide, because he talks about getting lucky, and let's just talk about what that looks like in the context of this book. So his formula for getting lucky is preparation, right, which is your personal growth, attitude, which is your belief and mindset, plus opportunity, a good thing coming your way, plus action, aka identifying the opportunity and then doing something about it, will equal luck. We all are lucky. And you talk about this, basically, if you're born here in America and you're one, alive, right side of the dirt, two, you have food to eat, and then three, you have people in your life like who love you and care about you, you're rich already, and you're already lucky. Because Kate says this all the time. Some disease could steal your eyesight. You could have been born with one arm. You could have not had one. You could not have both your parents. We're all lucky, but it's about shifting your perspective and then realizing what you can do to be more lucky. And also, Alex Hormozi, he has this quote about volume negates luck. That's something we can talk about later. And I think his book, $100 Million Offer, we'll go ahead and I'll confirm with both Bison and Serge, make sure that's something we want to do for the next book. But I think that might be a good book to do because he's actually getting ready to come out with the next book in the series, $100 Million Leads. And I think with all of us wanting to make money, the entrepreneurs, Alex Hormozi is definitely somebody that we should keep an eye on for sure, even if just pulling value for us to use. But let's move on to chapter 3 here. All right, checking time, 2:33. Okay, I'm doing pretty good because we only have 6 chapters to get through. All right, so you know what? Let me go ahead and pause here because we're basically almost halfway through. Questions, comments, concerns. I know I'm talking kind of quick. Hopefully, I'm talking clearly, but the goal is to make sure I touch on these key points and keep it moving. So, how we doing it? Questions, comments? I do see some chats. Anything in the chat? Any questions or just comments in the chat?
I think they're just comments. From my end, I mean, everything in the book I felt like was very it kept building on itself. It really drives the point of the compound effect. But most of the examples are very, very similar. It's interesting though how like your habits really is the thing that make you or break you, basically. Like at the end of the day, it all comes down to your habits, whether they're good or bad. The tracking of things, that's the chapter that resonated me, or that section resonated with me the most, because I'm the most disorganized person, and it's really hard for me to keep track of shit. So a lot of times I actually struggle with that. So being on top of like using softwares or tools to help me like do my finances, or like even just keep track of like what I eat, stuff like that, I started doing it more often. It makes things a lot easier because then my mind's just not all over the place, and I could like stick to a schedule. Once I develop the habit to sticking to the schedule, that's when it just becomes routine for me. And the moment something's routine for me, it's the easiest thing ever. I never have to think about it. And that's like the best for me, I feel personally.
For sure. And that's the goal too, because again, that's why it's so important to consciously choose your habits. So by the time it's on autopilot, you know it's bringing you toward where you want to go and you actually feel good about it. But think about, he talks about like just how many habits, and we'll talk about later on, just different things that we picked up, whether it's from different associations. He talks about like where we get our programming from. We'll talk about that in a bit, but thanks for chiming in, Serge. And that was a perfect segue into chapter 3, habits. Perfect segue. And so he opened up the chapter, like as you can see here, there's too many bullet points for us to talk about each one. But I'm going to talk about the first one because it goes right back to what Serge was just adding and talking about. So he starts on the chapter by talking about a teacher who's in the forest of the pupil, and he points to like, let's just like a little weed. He's like, hey, pull that up. And the kid with a little effort just yanks it out, roots and all. And then he points like another, let's just say, I don't know if it's a weed, but small tree-ish, maybe a little bit bigger, but again, nothing that substantial. He's like, kid, pull this up. And the kid goes ahead, pulls it up with a little bit more effort, but not really much to strain. And then he finds like maybe like a mid-sized, like a mid-sized plant. So he tells the kid to pull it up, and the kid, you know what I'm saying, he has to dig in, pull it up. And again, like pulls it up, roots and all. But that was really exhausting, so on and so forth. And then he points to like a semi-developed tree. And the kid, he basically can't pull it up, but he gets some tools, figures it out. And then like using some leverage, he can find a way, kind of just gets it up. And then he points at basically like this big oak tree that he could barely see the top of. Jack trees like pull this up, and obviously the kid couldn't, and he just looked at him like, yeah, I can't. And he's like, and the teacher goes to the student, you see, this is a power of trying to uproot bad habits that have been going on for too long. And like the whole point of that is relatively simple story, but the whole point of that is if your habit have been going on for the longer they've been going on, the hardest to uproot. So try and nip it in the bud as early and often as possible. So anyway, that was kind of the segue into this particular chapter about habits. And they talk about us being creatures of habits. Let me see here. What should I focus in on here in terms of,
Well, I have a question, dude. Maybe
Sure.
Serge or even Sid, or even you yourself, bro. Do you think you guys think you guys are already applying the good habits that are gonna lead to what you want? Or are you guys still in the phase of developing these habits, right? Like, are you guys in the phase where you're taking action, you're doing these habits, and it's just a matter of time, which is one of the things he talked about earlier? Or are you guys already at the point where you're applying these things and now you're in the momentum phase where all this stuff is happening for you guys, or it's in the works? Where do you guys think you guys are?
Ooh, I'll take the question first. I think it's one of those things where the more you learn, the more you realize, damn, I could have been doing this better. And then you have to slightly change it, which is why like I feel like learning is like is kind of like a catch-22. Because the more you know, ideally the better you'll act. But if you know better and you're not doing better, that right there, especially if it's something that's like one of your core values, it makes you uneasy, and it's one of the biggest causes of stress. So I guess to answer your question simply, I know where, like, for instance, like when it comes to fitness, that's probably why I got into fitness. Like when I was getting into fitness, I discovered this book, and that's why I have like such good foundations and fundamentals that come like let's just say the different items of wellness. But when it comes to money, I have tried to apply this to money, but I didn't have the best information. Because I didn't do this, like I didn't do the kind of due diligence I needed, like where I did for fitness per se, which is part of the reason why I am where I am. I'm not saying I'm doing bad, I'm not saying I'm doing good, but that's part of the reason why I am where I am. So now, even just our first book, Separate Life, now I'm still like in the process of rearranging my life in a particular way where it can compound what I'm learning and what I'm applying in that book. You know what I'm saying? Like even just about somewhere early in terms of depending what happens with the condo association, I may do X, Y, and Z. So for me, it's an ongoing battle. So certain things I've been able to build the right foundation and become a part of compounding. And for certain things, for certain aspects of my life, I'm still learning and develop and trying to apply it that way. So that's me in a nutshell. Serge, did anybody else on this call want to answer?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you 100% about it being ongoing. Like, I think I have a good set of habits right now. Like, in terms of how I start my days, I'm always waking up early, like starting the day with exercise. I have good eating habits, sleeping habits. So I've completely locked in on my health, at least. I feel like locking in on my health allowed me to have the right mental clarity as well as physical energy to tackle everything else. And I feel like once I accomplished that, then I was able to see there's so many levels to this. Like I haven't even like scratched the surface yet. Like once I conquered my health, I realized, oh, there's a whole nother level of discipline above that. And then once I started waking up early and doing that, then I realized there's a level above that. And so I'm still constantly a work in progress, but yeah, there's like infinite levels to this shit.
Infinite, like it's crazy. Like it really, I mean, it's pretty cool though, because like it's like a video game that you can really like never get tired of like playing, or you could really never win because like no matter how good you're doing, you can see the next thing, and that's the weirdest part about it. The smartest people are the people who realize that they know the least, which is the craziest part about it. Like kind of getting back to what we're talking about here. But no, I appreciate you adding that, Sid. Anybody else before we move on?
Yeah, I just call it the never ending grind. Like
Mm,
the to-do list that never ends. And that's just the way life is gonna be if you're driven and motivated to do something with it. If you're not, you're probably gonna be happy, complacent with whatever you have, and that's great. But I get bored. So I've had to come to the realization a long time ago that this to-do list I have is never gonna end, and I have to be able to
mm,
until I'm 6 feet under. And when I come to realize that I've working and working on these things is not hard. It's just a matter of how fast do you want to do it and how hard do you want to work to get them. And that's kind of the only thing that I always have to ask myself, because even I get lazy sometimes. Sometimes I'm just like, fuck, I don't want to do this shit today. But at the end of the day, you know, it's gonna happen based off how much work I put into it and how much determination I have, because no one else is gonna get it done for me. So
mm.
knowing that, you know, I try to improve every day, just like you guys, and work on things. I don't think I'm ever gonna master anything like fitness and health. I'm probably in the best shape that I've been in my early 20s. I took advantage of my body, having a fast metabolism and all that bullshit. That's not the case anymore in my mid 30s. I gotta actually watch what I eat, and it's only gonna get worse. Like working out, I've come to the realization it's gonna be a chore as you get older, because your body's gonna be like, fuck you, man. Like, I don't want to do this. I am too old for this shit. So it's only gonna get more difficult. So adjusting, it's like Sid says, learning about things, that's always gonna be the case when with a fitness perspective. It's never gonna be like, oh, I finally mastered it. So once you come to the realization of those things, that you're just you're just a student of life, and that's just the way it's going to be. I think it makes things a lot easier, and it makes learning from your mistakes a lot easier for me, because I used to be really hard on myself in my 20s, where now if I make mistakes, it's like, well, I fucked up. I can't do anything about it. All I can do is learn and keep pushing forward, and hopefully I don't jump into those landmines again.
Well said. Well said. Being a student in life, like literally and figuratively till you die. And that's part of the reason too, I feel like being a network is so important, because just like, okay, I need to be a student in life. So what's gonna allow me to really learn and make my life better? Because the reality situation is learning and applying is looking at life and make your life better. What's gonna allow you to do that most efficiently and effective? Having money. Because money literally makes the world go around. So now all of a sudden you have your time freedom back. And then you want to have a family, good. The biggest burden of having a family is money. You want to live anywhere, biggest burden is money. Everything, the biggest, like, so money isn't everything, but it's pretty important. So anyway, having that kind of mindset allows you to reprioritize like what's like the different variables in your life. And I guess with that said, we'll end the chapter with two things. So we'll start with the second bullet point here, creatures of habit, because again, the chapter is about habits, and I feel like we've been talking about that a good bit. But he opened the chapter talking about Aristotle, and Aristotle basically says, we are what we repeatedly do. And I'm not sure if you guys follow any Stoic Instagram pages, but the other half of that quote is, therefore excellence is a choice of basically it's like, therefore excellence is a choice of basically doing something, a decision. I just butchered it terrible, but it's just like excellence. You know what I'm saying? Butchered is horrible. But anyway, it is what it is. The important part is like literally being aware of this and then making those moment to moment decisions to put yourself in the right thing, in the right place, is a form of excellence, and thereby excellence is literally in the moment. And this is a warrior's fight. Like, we are modern day warriors, like fighting against ourselves, which is the only person we need to become the person we need to become. And anyway, that brings me to this other point here, top right, who you have to become. What do you want to achieve? And then more importantly, why do you want to achieve it? That's gonna be your driving power. And then lastly, and more importantly, it's not like, okay, how do I get those things? It's, who do I have to become to allow those things to be attracted to me because of my habits and basically who I become? And it's a different way of thinking, because it's like, oh, okay, I want to be a millionaire. Oh, okay, well then what does that actually mean? Who do I have to become to be a millionaire? Well, will a millionaire be aware of like where most of their money is going and how to multiply money and how to keep money and how to earn money? It starts to change the way you think about those things, and changing your thinking will change your feelings, which will change your actions, which will hopefully change your results. And then lastly here, last point I want to touch on this chapter is change is hard, yippee. Because it's hard, and because we're in a men's group like this, and because we're even having these conversations, and ideally have more of these conversations instead of having conversations. I mean, we could have conversations about the game, or we could have conversations about other things going on in life, but because we're focusing our attention on these things that tend to be more important, these harder things, it makes it a little bit easier for us to do. And because it's hard, other people won't do it. So it makes it easier for us to become exceptional, especially at a time like we are in today. So with that said, let's go ahead and move on here to chapter 4, because I don't want to run out of time here.
One last thing about the habits before we move on.
Yeah,
So,
perfect.
So one mindset shift that I had recently that I feel benefited me a lot is, so a lot of the times when we think about goals, we focus on like superficial things like, oh, I want to have like a Lambo or like a nice house or like a hot chick or whatever. But I realized like focusing on all these materialistic things, the result is like, it doesn't give you fulfillment in life, and it also seems so far away. So rather than focus on the end result, I try to think, what kind of man do I have to become to attract those kind of things in my life. I'm more interested rather in the result than becoming the type of man who can earn those things.
Mhm.
Dude,
For
that's solid.
sure.
I literally wrote this down before we started the meeting. I said, this is a thought I had from reading this book. I said, gravitate to people that promote process versus outcome, right? Because it's so easy to go into, people are constantly trying to promote, hey, you can make money X, Y, Z. But I think if you focus or really gravitate to people that let you know, hey, it's going to be the process that you need to fall in love with. I think that's a better perspective to have and a good approach to take.
For sure, fucking for sure. It's crazy. We can have a
I
different
like that.
conversation just on that alone. But no, thank you both for the contributions in 22, because of the quote that I just found on Instagram. Maybe it was like it's from a video. But it's like, don't climb, going back to the external gratification type things. It says, don't climb the mountain so others can see you, or so the world can see you. Climb the mountain so you can see the world. And then you're saying to attract what it is that you want towards you, so on and so forth. But let's move on to chapter 4 and momentum, aka Big Mo, as the author talks about it. Harnessing the power of Big Mo, which is momentum. And it's funny too, because we're talking about routines, and he talked about building and figuratively routine power in this chapter. But I mean, let's go ahead and talk about routines. I feel like we kind of touched on it pretty good. If anything, I think what we need to focus about the routine is going to be making sure that your routine is set up in a particular way where what you do is more process driven to bring you to the outcome that you want. That's basically the biggest takeaway, because those routines, they're going to become unconscious and they're going to guide you, whether good or bad, where you want to go, where you don't want to go. So like that's the biggest takeaway for that particular point. But even more important to that, I think, well, I believe anyway, is bookending your days. And bookending your days basically means that you're not going to be able to control the stuff that happens to you during the course of your day, but typically you can control how you start your day and how you end your day. And that's where you can go ahead and focus in on making sure that your core competencies and your core tasks that allow you to stay grounded in terms of who you are and what you want to do and where you want to move is getting done. So bookending your days, he goes into some examples there. Like that's probably one of the key takeaways from this particular chapter. Rise and Shine, I'm pretty sure he talks a little more about that. Sweet Dreams, talks about having an evening routine, shake it up. Basically, he talks about shaking up, just basically adding some variety in there, because depending what you want to do, I think he gave an example of working out. After being consistent for so long, doing the same kind of workouts, his body starts to get accustomed to it and he no longer starts making gains. So it's good to switch it up, getting to a rhythm and finding your new groove based on the pattern of life that you want to particularly run, and then registering your rhythm, aka making sure that you're doing it enough that you're now building in new neural pathways and new grooves, because like it's your neural pathways and your grooves by doing things over and over again, which allows it to become unconscious. So if you're trying to pick a bad habit that already has deep grooves, you have to replace it with a new habit and then continually do the new habit until that becomes deeper, and then also not doing the bad habit, that one becomes less. Bryce, you're gonna say something?
Oh, no,
Okay,
I
gotcha.
should mute this. No, I'm good.
Nope, okay, bet. Rhythms of life, talks about that and applies it to different phases of life or different parts of life, depending on where you're gonna be. The power of consistency, which we touched on earlier in the book, and it's a theme throughout this book, as Serge was saying, because like it's more or less the same key core themes, but maybe applied to different aspects, to focus on that action plan or more of the process, to use a term that Bison used earlier. And then he gave the example of the pump well. And specifically, he gave a couple examples, but one here is a pump well. And the pump well, basically, for those of you who are not familiar, old school wells back in the day, they go down typically hundreds of feet into the ground to get to the well water, whatnot. You had to thoroughly pump it. And as you were pumping the pump well, it would build pressure and pull the water up you could say like the tube and out the spout. But the thing with the pump well is you got to continually keep pumping to keep the suction going, almost like a straw per se. And if you were to stop pumping for long enough, the water would fall down, and then you have to start all over again from the beginning. And it's always hardest in the beginning. And when people want to start a new habit and build that consistency and start to get into the compound effect, the hardest part is you're doing all that pumping, and literally and figuratively, all the water's still underground. You're making progress, but you don't see any results. and you do it for long enough, and then you start to see barely some results, maybe after 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 months, 9 months, whatever the case may be. And then you start seeing like maybe a few drops of water, and then all of a sudden the drops of water are disgusting. And you get a little bit more water, and then out of nowhere, you start to get a nice flow. And here's the thing, when you get the flow, don't stop and kill your momentum. You have to keep pumping. However, it'll be easier for you to get more water out of the wall with less pumps because the water has been pulled up from where it was within underground. So anyway, that was a point there. He's like, do not be consistent in terms of the pumping. It's gonna be hard from the beginning till you get traction. And when you get traction, you can pump less and get more out of it, because that's when you actually have momentum. That's the power of momentum. But it's easy to lose momentum. You take off for 2 weeks after crushing it, you might lose some momentum. You might, so on and so forth. I'm not gonna be a dead horse. You guys get the message here. But like that was the whole the pump ball analogy that he spoke about. All right, so moving on to chapter 5 and influences. So basically, as you can see here, this particular section is broken down to 3 parts: garbage in, garbage out, and essentially don't drink dirty water. So he talks about this in a couple of different dimensions in terms of garbage in, garbage out, specifically eating food that's not good for you. If you eat food that's not good for you, it makes you sluggish, it makes you put on weight, so on and so forth. And that is obviously bad for you, but you have some control there, because even if you're unconsciously eating bad food and whatnot, you still have to take the food and put it in your face. He says he wants people to focus on basically what is in their immediate environment and what they ingest from a mental standpoint as well, because that is something that just seeps into you. You can't really control it because you don't have to actually put it into. It's just, if it's in your environment, it seeps into you. And he called that dirty water, specifically. Whatever kind of information, knowledge, whatever you're getting from your environment. Whereas clean water is educational, let's just say audiobooks, educational, regular books, things that allow you to do things and be better than you were yesterday, or at least give you new information that you can now act on. So that's don't drink dirty water, be aware of it. And then specifically, he talks about 2 different items. Put yourself on a media diet, because he talks about basically how media has been sensationalized, because our minds and our brains are wired for us to survive, not for us to be happy. And because of that, when we hear bad news, specifically like these, he called them salacious headlines and whatnot, that's just meant to grab our attention and fear monger about the world, your brain pays attention because its only job is to keep you alive. So we actually focus more on that. And again, where your attention goes, energy flows. So you need to be on a media diet and redirect that mental attention towards what you do want, where you want to go, and the process, basically executing the actions that in that process will bring you where you want to go. So anyway, put yourself on a media diet, that's where that comes in. And then he speaks about his personal junk filter. So again, talking about the media, he's in the real estate game. So he basically set up an RSS feed that literally only lets through information that he deemed as important. Let's just say through keywords, whether it's real estate, whether it's his local market, local town, so on and so forth. So basically from the whole barrage of media coming at everybody all the time, he only gets filtered information specific to him that he wants to see. And that's how he plays that game. Next, associations. Who is influencing you? And then as you can see here, he talks about dissociations, aka people who are in your life who probably shouldn't be in your life and who you should not be associating with. Limited associations are people who, he talks about it in categories. He's like, you may have a friend who's maybe not somebody you want to spend 3 days around, but you can spend 3 hours around that person, right? Maybe watching the game or catching a couple of drinks, whatever, cool. And there might be some people who are not 3-hour friends, but they're more 3-minute friends because they kind of live in a different life path. You want to be polite and kind, so you may like interact with them for a little bit. So it's more or less about managing association. And he actually talked about this pretty good drill that I've been meaning to do, but I haven't had a chance to get around to it. But basically just taking a sheet of paper, drawing 2 lines down the middle, so you have 3 spaces, and then basically 3 categories are important to you. He gives 3 categories in the book. And he's like, who are your top 5 associations in these 3 categories? Then you have to ask yourself, are they adding to your life or are they not? And then basically he has a couple of questions you can do per person. And if they're not building and help you become the next or better version of yourself, you have to strike them off. And this probably goes back to the disassociation standpoint. and then find your new top five. Because at the end of the day, you will be an average of the top five people who you hang out with. And he talks about too, physically, yes, but you could also hang out with people in terms of their ideas and mentally based on the books or the content that they produce as well. And he talks about one of his mentors, Jim Rohn, where he spent 99% of the time through audio tapes and CDs. I kind of did something similar with both Grant Cardone, actually with quite a few people, but Grant Cardone in particular, especially when I was first starting out. But yeah, so that's that. He talks about finding a peak performance partner, almost like an accountability partner, the same way we do here. Investing in mentorship, spoke about himself and how many of the people who he has in his network are super successful. They all pay for mentorship. People who are world-class in one or two things, and they basically bestow that wisdom and knowledge upon them in that particular item, in that particular aspect. And then also developing your own personal board of advisors to give you advice on how to navigate life. Basically, people who are a couple steps ahead of you. Lastly here, environment. So changing your view changes your perspective. And basically, this is super important. This is actually a copy of number one. I don't know what's going on here. Basically, when we talk about here, I'll update that. But when we talk about changing your environment, changes your perspective, basically talks about a house on the hill and how we would drive down to a certain part of town, which is super nice, and he'd eat like lunch basically on the water there. And he saw this beautiful house on top of the hill. He's like, and it would always catch his eye. Basically, long short of it is being in that space made him feel different. And not only make it feel different, made it easier for him to work harder to be in that new space that he wants to be in. And I feel like a lot of us had something similar happen in our meetup when we were in Miami. Cause it's like, yo, you know what? Okay, I'm in my environment, cool, but I need to be out there. How do I work harder, position myself, be smarter to get out there and really make some shit happen? And it's very, very similar. And let's go ahead and get here to, I know we're coming out here on the hour. Chapter 6, acceleration. All right, let's touch on each of these real quick. Moments of truth. This was a really, really important part. Like I remember this, like this was yesterday when I first read this book like 8, 9, 10 years ago. Moments of truth. He talks about Lance Armstrong and, well, he talks about a couple of things. He talks about him riding a bike uphill, steep uphill for a long amount of time, maybe for 1 or 2 miles, and how that's when you get to face who you really are, not who you think you are, not who you want to be. When the going gets tough, you will hit your wall, and then it becomes a matter of you either digging deep and find out if you're the person you think you are, or if you basically shrink back down to the forces around you. And that is by far probably the most important thing, because like every day, we all get to certain points when we feel like we're hitting that wall. We may not want to do this like last report, or we may not want to do this last day at work, whatever the case may be. But that's when champions are made. What do you do when you get to that wall? Do you push past it and you keep going step by step and just keep pushing? Or do you hit that wall and like all of a sudden you listen to your subconscious mind that tells you, you know what, relax, it's not that deep. Oh, you know what, X, Y, Z. And basically like that's the nuts and bolts of moments of truth. Because in those moments of truth, that dictates who you really are, and that's your real character. Aside from what you think, aside from what you're being praised for, when shit like that happens and you're forced to really dig deep, that's when you know who you are. And then he speaks about that in a few different ways, but yep, moments of truth. Then multiplying results here. Multiplying results. Like I'm drawing a blank on that, but I think it's an extension. Let me just look this up real quick. But beat expectations, essentially, we all have expectations some way, shape, or form, whether it's our job, what's what we have for ourselves. But the thing is, extraordinary, be extraordinary. So do what's expected of you, but then beat the expectations. Do more than just do more than just what's expected. And he gave a pretty good example. He talks about like one of his friends applying for a job, and it's a job his friend thought it was a dream job. And he's like, listen, go there. Basically, his friend was in California, the job was in Boston, Massachusetts. And he's like, listen, go there in person, so on and so forth. And his friend goes to the author. Oh no, they're gonna fly the top three people, they'll fly out X, Y, and Z. He's like, no, listen, do more than what's expected. Beat their expectations, show up on a whim, and then like show them, like demonstrate that you actually care. It's okay that it might look over the top, so on and so forth. Take luck and inconsistency. Basically, just take as many variables out of the equation as possible. It's actually better to be a little bit extra than not notice. Basically, the friend did not listen and he did not get the job. But that was just one example of literally and figuratively doing your best to beat expectations. And he talked about that in a few different ways. And yeah, I don't know. I think that was briefly. But that's it in a nutshell when it comes to the compound effect. I did not do it. I mean, this was a great call. And I think we those of you who came off mute added some good value to obviously the conversation in the book. And even though this was a good call and hopefully ideally valuable for those of you here and whoever's going to be watching this in the future, there's no substitute for reading the book or at very least listening to the audiobook, because just exposure to the pure ideas, it'll probably hit you differently, and you may even take something different from what we've explained here that may or may not help you and help improve your life. But more than anything else, this is something that's happening. The compound effect is something that's happening whether you want it to or not. So you might as well become aware of it and then use it positively, because now you can't say you're ignorant to it. You know what I'm saying? So it's one of those things that's either going to be with you or against you. So
Yeah, man, that's actually a funny thing you said. That is, your thoughts will either work for you or against you. And I got that thought after listening to Tom Wheelwright. He's one of the advisors for Robert Kiyosaki. And he said it in taxes, right? He said taxes could either work for you or against you. And at that phase, I was on a personal development journey. And I said, damn, how can I have my thoughts work for me? So I'm going to quick share. I know we're running down on time. We have about 5 minutes, but I'm going to quick share something that I've done. Although I'm not super proficient at it, it has helped me, and hopefully somebody else could get some value from it. But
sure.
what I went ahead and did is I created voice affirmations, right? So we've all talked, or we've heard people talk about how important affirmations are. So I went ahead and took a jog when I left the country. I took a jog, and in my highest state of mind, I recorded myself screaming, pretty much just in my most peak state, saying my affirmation. And what I went ahead and did is I created a playlist with my affirmations, right? And then I also, I take the time, I still have them. And when I go to sleep, I'll just play it over and over, right? The things that I want. And it's super fucking intense, like super intense. Now, I'm not saying I'm super proficient at it in terms of constantly having my thoughts work for me. I still have negative thoughts, but I will say this is in one of these recent moments that I had where I had to overcome some shit. I heard in my unconscious mind, I heard my affirmations. You know what I mean? I heard myself like saying these things in this time. It was fucking super. It was something that I was very grateful for. So if anybody could take something away from it, is create your own affirmation. And I took it a step further as well, and I did it with some instrumentals in the background. But I just did everything possible to at least consume my mind with my own affirmations, and it's helped me. It's helped me. I haven't gotten where I want to be, but it for sure played a role in keeping me level-minded at a certain time in my life.
No, for sure. And I'll tell you what, thanks for sharing that. It's funny you say that, because that's one thing I started saying to myself. I'm not gonna say I do audio engineering, but I started doing some audio engineering for fun, because I do like write positive hip hop, so on and so forth. But part of the reason why I write positive hip hop is because most music is really good, but it's dirty water, it's junk, it's bullshit. You see what I'm saying? But then every once in a while you can find, like, let's just say some artists who do create music that not only you vibe with, but there's a good message and it becomes stuck in your head. So anyway, I still have to say this. I've been doing that, but besides doing that too, I noticed that if I pull content, let's just say Tate content, or Waller content, or Kiyosaki content, or Grant Cardone content, or Peter Schiff content, whatever, like, I'm saying, if I have content of them saying fire or profound things, I just pull the audio and I'm like, oh, okay, I could just make this long compilation of this audio that you're just listening to, because I'll tell you what, some of those messages in terms of what they're saying, also with the right kind of instrumental but underneath it, it puts you in a different state, because we are vibrational beings. And words, everything is a vibration, and like they really do affect you differently. And to your point, I think that's really where the next wave of music is going, because people are going to realize, oh, okay, in this attention economy, I need to be getting more out of the music I consume. I need to be getting more out of the stuff I'm consuming, which I think is part of the reason why audio podcasts, especially valuable ones that are teaching, are blowing up, even just exposure. But anyway, like, that's a good share, and thanks for calling that out. Let me see here. We're basically at the end here. Questions, comments, concerns. So this is the perfect time to go ahead and just maybe add anything else if anybody wants to say anything, because I think we did a good job of doing this. I think we're still just under an hour, right?
Yeah, I think Rod Eric wants to talk, maybe.
Yeah, y'all hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
Ken.
Yeah, so I just want to add to what Bison said. Like the way he records his affirmations and like play them over again, for me, that's like listening and reading to scripture.
Mm.
So when I take like ancient script and literature and stuff like that, and I go and, and read it, with the translations, and then I study Hebrew. So I go to the concordance and I go to like the next level of it too. So like there's certain scriptures that just like I keep dear to me. And that's like the same way he said helps him in his troubled times. That's what helps me on my troubled times.
Mm.
And throughout my life, it's definitely been dear to me because I grew up in it. And so I never just like walked away. And I think a lot of times people like they get truth and then they figure out like, oh, it's really this. And it's like, nah, bro, just keep it near to you because somewhere in your life, you're gonna need something from that. And so I pull inspiration from that. And with me growing in a Christian household, the Holy Bible is very close to me. So I didn't put it away. I just continue to go more in depth with it. So it's certain scriptures that stay with me and it helps me through troubled times. So that's mine.
No, for sure. I appreciate that. Thanks for sharing. That's fire. And you say you studied Hebrew? Like you already wait to try and learn more about it?
Yeah. So I studied I studied the Hebrew and like the modern Hebrew and then the Phoenician as well. So
Mm.
the
Yeah, that's
concordance
interesting.
when you understand the Septuagint and just the Greeks, they translated the Torah, right? And then eventually it went from there in the timeline and then it translated into the New Testament. So if you have a concordance with your Bible, you'll understand the true meanings because the modern age and the stuff is kind of like changed over time. But
Mm.
the cool thing I understand about Hebrew is that they have precepts, and that mean that they have dots that connect to other scriptures. So if you're reading the Bible in chronological order, you're not reading it correctly because it's I hate to go into this, but right, it's all like jumbled up, right? Because
Mm.
people in the past were saying the same thing, but then it correlated to what they said in the future. And that's why it says that he's the Alpha and Omega. His word will never return void because it's always a continuous line. It's just a matter of knowing that vibration and knowing, okay, how does this scripture connect to the past scripture? So
Mm.
so
No,
stuff
that's
like that.
interesting.
Yeah. So it's like that study, understanding that it's very powerful because I can go, it's almost kind of like going into the future because how they were perceiving it then is kind of somewhat how we perceive it now.
Mm.
It's interesting. So like Proverbs, right? They always talk about in the manosphere of Proverbs, right? You go to Proverbs, you're dealing with women. There's some stuff in there, right? It's subtle stuff in there that can help you still today. You just got to uncover it, and connect
Mm.
it back. So
No,
yeah,
for sure. Like, I think that conversation should be had like in a different space. But like, but that's definitely interesting. That's kind of
definitely,
fire.
definitely,
But
bro.
but
Thank
no,
you.
but no, for sure. Thank you for contributing and coming off mute. But all right, y'all. So I think we're ready to call this an end for this particular book club session. Anybody else have anything they want to say? Going
Climb.
once?
Thank you, man. It was a good one. Thank you.
No, for sure. 110%. All right, y'all. So let's go ahead and end it here. Look out, and so I'm gonna go ahead and connect with Bison and Serge. We'll decide what the next book is gonna